Here's an idea. Let's take the most destructive artillery weapon ever made and put it in an orchestra. Hi all, it's Mike, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most well-loved pieces in the entire catalog of Western classical music, Pyotr Ilyas Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. I looked it up, that's how it's pronounced, Pyotr. We'll just call him Pete. This is one of those pieces that seems to be universally loved everywhere. I mean, even by people who think that classical music is boring. How could you possibly think that this is boring? It has explosions written into the score. Like, literally, cannon fire! The 1812 Overture, whose full title is the Year 1812 Festival Overture in E-flat major, opus 49. Thanks, Wikipedia. Was written as part of a huge party that Moscow was throwing back in 1880. Moscow, Russia, Moscow, Idaho. The Cathedral of Christ the Savior was being completed. Tsar Alexander II's silver anniversary was coming up. Russia beat France back several years ago. A lot of stuff was going on, and Pete's friend Nikolai Rubinstein wanted him to get on the action of that. And so, 6 weeks later, the 1812 Overture was born. It begins with the Russian Orthodox hymn, O Lord, Save Thy People. There's a link in the description of this piece actually being sung, as well as right here. It's played by a string sextet, but not the one that we're used to hearing with the 2 violins, 2 violas, and 2 cellos, or celli, if you want to be pretentious about it. This one is played by 4 cellos and 2 violas, sometimes more depending on how many strings you actually have. The winds, the horns, the brass, and all the strings and everything, they'll come up in just a little bit. Now, I love how Tchaikovsky wanted to start this off with this hymn, because remember, this is a festival celebrating Russia's defense against the invading armies of Napoleon back in 1812, and that's just something you didn't do back then. You don't just, Napoleon was a big deal. Big guy in the army taking over, Europe. And the words to the hymn are all about the Lord preserving his people against their enemies, thereby preserving his own heritage. And it just makes sense that Tchaikovsky would choose this hymn. He himself was a devout member of the Russian Orthodox Church, so this hymn would have a very special significance to him personally, as well as to everyone else at this festival. Remember, we're dedicating a cathedral here. So a lot of this piece is actually sort of a medley of different French and Russian tunes. So we started off with the Orthodox hymn, O Lord Save Thy People, and it's not too much longer before we come up with France's theme, the Marseillaise, which is a national anthem that is much more gruesome and hardcore than we typically associate with, the French. It talks about raising the bloody standard and talking about their soldiers' throats being slit on the battlefield. And there's a bit in there when they talk about watering the meadows of France with the blood of their enemies.
Nous sommes français. Nous sommes hardcore.
A little bit later, we also hear the Russian folk song, At the Gate, At My Gate. There's a link for that in the description too, or there it is. And then when we get to the finale, not only do we hear Save Thy People again, but this time, with full orchestra and an extra set of brass. The score doesn't even say which instruments to use, it just says brass. But you'll also hear the Imperial Russian national anthem for the time, God Save the Tsar. But this one is harder to hear. For one, you have the main theme just going off in the entire orchestra, which is just super catchy. So you have that to compete against, as well as, cannons. By the way, there is a fantastic transcription of this piece where all of the Russian songs are either replaced or coupled with actual choir singing them. It's absolutely fantastic. It's written by American conductor Igor Budikov. There's a link for it down in the description as well, or did I get it right? Now, I don't know the audience's reaction during the premiere of this piece, nor do I know if actual cannons were used. Most musicologists don't think there were, which really kind of bums me out. But there are a couple of fun things to consider had they actually been there. We know that there are 16 shots fired in the duration of this piece, and we know that with cannons of the day, they were pretty much impossible to load in time, even, just once in that time with all 16 shots. So, had there been actual cannons there at the premiere, it wouldn't have been just 1 or 2. There would have been 16 cannons on stage, or better yet, surrounding the audience. And along with that, cannons aren't particularly good, at least back in the day, of going off exactly when you want them, so it wouldn't have been nice and ordered like projected in the score. It would have been slightly chaotic. Did they know that they were going to be shot at during the piece, or did they just start fleeing or shooting back into the orchestra when the explosion started going off? while we're on the subject, what was going on in Pete's mind when he was orchestrating this? I mean, he already has a large orchestra with plenty of winds and a whole lot of brass, and then he added in an entire extra brass band, and then he adds in church bells, like not just, the dinky little tubular chimes. I'm talking like actual bells from a church. They're really big. Still wasn't enough. Let's just add in the single most destructive weapon ever made by man. Why not? Speaking of cannons, can I just say that while I understand the logistical difficulties of putting, actual artillery on stage, what a bummer it is when an orchestra has to settle for just hitting a drum really hard. If it doesn't sound like you've blown something up, you're not doing it right. Now, it's interesting to note that Tchaikovsky himself was not very fond of this piece. He's recorded as describing it as
Very loud and noisy, but without artistic merit, because I wrote it without warmth and without love.
It did, however, make him super rich, so, there's that. But really, I can understand where he's coming from. I mean, because of all the different themes he used in it, he never really got a chance to develop any of them fully, or really very far at all. And really, the amount of original music, original tunes that Tchaikovsky came up with is pretty limited in this one. There's an awful lot of stop-and-go motion. I mean, even the national anthems that he used are inaccurate because neither France nor Russia actually used those tunes as their national anthem during the War of 1812. I mean, the 1812 Overture really does lack a lot of the finesse, a lot of the warmth and nuance that Tchaikovsky's other pieces are known for, like his symphonies and his concertos, or concerti if you want to be pretentious about it. But regardless of its faults, it is still not only Tchaikovsky's single most popular work that he ever wrote, but it's one of the all-time favorites in the entire Western music world. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. If you have a favorite piece of classical music that you'd like to chat about and break down, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Also, down in the description, there's a link to a playlist that you can subscribe to that has all the pieces we talked about today. Both the instrumental and choral version of the 1812 Overture, along with all the other pieces that Tchaikovsky included in it. Happy listening!